Hi, everyone. It's the Catholic CEO, Henry Katarna. Welcome to our series on exemplary Catholic leaders. I'm really happy today because I have a guest, Michelle Dunne, whom I've gotten to know over the last couple of months. Michelle is a talented woman. She's got all sorts of skills in a lot of areas. I would say life coaching is probably the best way to describe it. And Michelle, I know you're going to correct me about that as we get into this discussion, but life coaching. And so Michelle, among her many qualifications, if you read her bio, it's a very interesting bio. She's a metanoia Catholic mindset coach. And we're going to talk about that in a few seconds here, because that's an interesting thing, a metanoia Catholic mindset coach. And Michelle also is certified in the art of coaching, which uses the Clifton Strengths model. And so again, that's an interesting topic that I know we want to dig into. So really happy that we have Michelle here today with us. So Michelle, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Hi, Henry. Thank you for inviting me here. I'm really honored to be in this space with you.
Well, it's a great honor to have you with us as well, especially since we got to know each other a little bit on January 11th. The Catholic CEO had a summit on reading the signs of the times. And we were really trying to help people who had lost their jobs for conscience reasons. And you were one of our speakers. And so I want to remind everybody that's watching us today, you can still go to our website and find the link, and you'll see Michelle's presentation there. It was very useful, very helpful. It really helped a lot of people, learn how to actually deal with the situation and bring some tools that they maybe never knew they had or that were not available to them to the situation. So Michelle, thanks for doing that. And maybe we would start there. I have several topics to discuss with you, especially your Catholic faith journey and things like that. But what did you hear at that session we did, that summit on January 11th? What did you hear from people?
Well, in addition to the concern, and when people are in that position of suddenly being without income or the resources that they need for their families, sometimes they don't see their purpose and their own worth as clearly. And it's really good to come into a space like that and have other people who can reflect that back to them, and who can assure them that, hey, remember, God has a plan for you, and I can reflect back to you the goodness that you already have and what you're bringing into whatever you wind up in the next situation. So some of what I heard was fear, of course, concern for the future, and wanting to depend completely on God, but knowing that we also have to be a moving object for him to work within us, right? And so not wanting to fall into despair or confusion about what's coming next. So I did hear a little bit of that and some hope for future, and people who just wanted to tap into some resource. Like, okay, I need a little support here.
Yeah, this is thanks for that observation. I think people, since that summit, people have been coming to us with a lot of support and even gratitude for the fact that we had about 150 participants who really, from across the United States and Canada, quite a wide diverse audience, and people, I think, felt a sense of hope, like you say. And so thanks again for being part of that. Let's turn to Michelle Dunne now. We're always interested in this series to understand how you came, first of all, to the Catholic faith, and how does it govern and guide your life now, Michelle? And in the end, I want to also speak to you about how you got to be in the situation where you are a life coach.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not a particularly colorful story. I was a cradle Catholic, but the difference for me is that my mom converted in order to marry my dad and moved far away from home. She was Southern Baptist and kept very close ties with her family in South Georgia. I live in Virginia. So we spent a lot of time, long periods of time, in my grandparents' home. And So there was a little bit of tension there, because
Mhm.
Southern Baptist background, marrying into a deeply Catholic background. In fact, my dad was in seminary for some time before he
Mm,
met my mother
mhm,
and chose not to be a priest, and
mhm,
then wound up marrying my mom.
mhm,
And so there was always that little bit of tension between the differences and some questions about, what it means to be Catholic. So I'd like to say that it strengthened my faith, but at the time, what it really did was it showed me, I mean, my uncle, um, while being very not necessarily accepting of our Catholicism, he helped me kind of dig into. He would bring up Bible passages and question me just a little bit as a young kid. And so my mom would also play the piano at her parents' church while we were staying there. So we would go to mass, and then we would go to Southern Baptist. I can't even remember, Bible study, I guess, is what they called it, right before their service. So
yeah.
I witnessed some of that as well. So I got kind of a full range of what it looked like to be a believer in God in general. And then I think it helped me to really choose into my own faith as I got older. So that little bit of tension there and understanding that, this is what it looks like to be Southern Baptist, and this is what it looks like to be Catholic. And where can we, like Pope John Paul II would say, where can we meet? Where are the things that we meet on? What are the things that we agree on and understand? Um, and so I always remained in the church. And then when I got married, um, and we started having our own children, we knew that we wanted to raise them to be fully Catholic. I married a man who was Catholic as well.
Mhm.
So that really played into how we raised our kids. But in recent years, there's just been a deepening of my faith.
Mm.
Um, and knowing that I wanted to bring it into every aspect of my life.
Mhm. So it sounds to me like maybe at a young age you were already, would this be fair? You were into apologetics in a certain way because your uncle was asking you about the faith. And so were you actually, researching and looking up answers, or were you speaking freely about your faith at that young age?
I
It's an
think at
interesting
that at
picture.
that point, I probably was really just trying to figure out, where do I fit in,
Mhm,
honestly, in
mhm,
that self-centered way that a child would do. Um, and trying to figure out how to honor my father, who was the stronger in the Catholic faith of the two of them, really.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, I think at that time it was really just trying to figure out, where do I fit in here and what do I believe? So probably more of a self-centered
mhm,
thing than really at the time researching and sort of just taking in and observing how that played out in conversations within my family. Um, yeah, I think not so apologetics then, but really that just lays the foundation. As a child, we're just taking in all sorts of things, and it laid the foundation, I think, for myself to become more curious about, well, let me look into this. How does Mary play into my faith journey?
mhm, mhm.
You know?
This is it's interesting. You've talked about the deepening of your faith, and one of the things that you and I do share is that a belief that what we do professionally, let us say in our work, actually is for example, the Catholic CEO. We think that we can be Catholic and successful in business. We think we can do both. It calls for deep knowledge of the faith and a commitment to the faith, but also a commitment to running good businesses that follow Catholic principles. And so when you said deepening, it reminded me that so many people, when we talk about faith journeys, there seems to be a period of time where they either left the faith and reverted, or they were maybe they even changed religions, or maybe they came to Catholicism from a different place. But you have continuously, it seems, maintained your Catholicism, and it has only deepened. And so I'm interested in how that happens, because there would be pressures on you and everybody to divert away from the faith, maybe at university, at college. How did that work, that you have retained the faith and deepened it?
Well, I think one of the reasons I have is that early on, I was 18 when I first met my husband. We didn't start dating until I was 19. And we knew each other through college, and I lived at home. And so my husband is very black and white. And if we start getting into Clifton strengths later, his number 1 is analytical, and his number 5 is deliberative. So he's very steady as you go. And I'm more on the emotional side. So he was very interested in maintaining our Catholic faith as we were dating. And so we'd go to church with his parents one weekend and my parents another weekend, which is not a typical dating scenario for most people. But then I got to say, as I progressed through like my parenting, there were times where I ran into what I would call the letter of the law. There were groups that I got into as I was raising my kids that I think had a negative effect on my kids growing up, because they were so didactic and not understanding of maybe child development or human development in a way that helped them apply Catholic theology to a growing and developing teen, let's say. Some of the things that we ran into were some kind of judgmental things in youth group and such that weren't necessarily helpful. And so it caused me to want to find ways to teach my kids a little bit more daily application of how God sees me. And I probably didn't know it at the time, Henry, that was forming who I would be today. We're all in formation all the time.
Yes, it's so true. And I can see that. In fact, we've been talking about your faith journey, and there's so much more that could be said. But you've reached a point in our discussion today where we're talking about how it has formed who you are today. And so let's go there for a few moments. You are, you're a metanoia Catholic mindset coach, and you are using the Clifton Strengths model, and you're certified in the art of coaching, and you have many other qualifications that I know of, plus much experience too. You are in front of people all the time dealing with these things. Let's talk about that. First of all, what is all that?
Well, let's
and
see.
Secondly, how does the Catholic faith fit into all of that?
Well, I started with attachment parenting. I was an attachment parent advocate when I had my last child, which was 15 years ago. And I found that I really just enjoyed talking with people and helping them work through some problems. And I got into, then I started homeschooling, and I got into something called doTERRA. It was an essential oil company, and I'm still involved with them. But the awesome thing is I found it through my Catholic homeschool group. And so within that Catholic homeschool group, I started a business, which I never intended to do. But during that time too, my father was very ill, and it was about a 9-month journey preparing him actually to die. And it really had an impact on my eternal perspective. And so even within doTERRA, I kept within my faith, because I had all these friends that we were kind of enrolling into this team that I was leading. And I also got to see what it looked like when people forgot their faith and jumped off into, because a lot of people in these, natural health arenas can go pretty far off into another lane, and so I also got to see what that looked like. So there's this theme of harmony in my life, and harmony is one of my top strengths. That theme of holding the tension of, I can love you and understand you as a child of God, while also understanding that I don't want to go down that road with you. I'm going to stay here in my lane. And I was probably really quiet about it in the beginning. So somewhere along the way, I took my Clifton Strengths assessment and learned that I'm number 1, input, number 3, intellection. I have a mind for gathering information and applying it to relationship. And so I started leading my team in a certain way and got more and more into Clifton Strengths and started coaching through the art of coaching. got my certification there. And as I was coaching people in a secular way, I found myself saying, there is more available. There must be more available. I feel like I can only take these people that I'm coaching so far. And then what I know to be God is missing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So lo and behold, when you put it out there to God, you're like, oh, God, there's something else here. He's gonna help you out with that, right? And so last March, I had COVID and I was very sick and quarantined in my room, away from my son so that he could go to school, all the rules that we have here in Virginia, trying to be obedient to the rules that we have, while also understanding that that God is ultimately in charge. Anyway, so I wound up watching a Catholic virtual conference online, and I met Matt and Aaron Ingold through this Catholic conference. And they were talking about this journal, the Daily 7 Metanoia Catholic Journal. I immediately downloaded the free sample and started working through it. And I thought, this is it. This is this missing piece here of repentance and renewal, and renewing our minds so that we can understand the will of God. And it just opened up a whole new avenue of applying Clifton strengths in my coaching. But also, Henry, it was a very personal journey at the same time.
As it often is for us when we transition from a certain type of faith to a more deep faith. So are these, Michelle, are these tools, Clifton Strengths and Metanoia Catholic, I guess, is Catholic. Is Clifton Strengths, are these Catholic models, or are they models that you've used and then you've applied some of the Catholic principles, like the Daily 7 journal? Is that how that works?
So Metanoia Catholic, they came from the Life Coach School, which has a model of its own, and they adapted that into 7 exercises in their Daily 7 journal. And it is thoroughly Catholic. They based it all on a Catholic anthropology based on St. Thomas Aquinas. They've got a little bit of Neil Lozano's Unbound in there. But they teach, first and foremost, the ontological man, which is a pretty complex set of concepts from St. Thomas Aquinas. And even without needing to get into that, the process is basically one of gratitude, one of bringing your goals and desires to God and allowing him to purify them, like the gifts that we bring to the altar. And then doing kind of a mind dump, a download of, this is the mess. These are my tangled knots of my humanity. And then pulling out one circumstance that's fact that we can work from, and interrogating our thoughts, because we all know that our thoughts in some way create the reality that we're dealing with.
Yes.
And only God can renew those. But what happens is we find out our own, what am I trying to say? Acceptance of lies, really, our own consent, which sounds a little harsh, but it's our consenting to the lies that we have developed over our lifetime that causes us pain. And it causes us disconnection from the people that we love. And ultimately that disconnects us more from God.
Yes. So this, you're reminding me of a time in my life when I was doing mentoring work for secular organizations, not Catholic in any way, except they were decent corporations that had peer models where CEOs and executives would work together in groups, up to 12 people, that sort of thing. And I did that for many years. And I had people who were successful in business. They built wealth. I helped them get wealthy. I did. And they had all the toys, but then only a few would come to me, but they would one by one come, under the privacy of darkness, you could say, like in scripture. They would come and they would say to me, I'm doing all this and my company's successful, but I'm not, it's not, what else is there? This can't be that can't be all, because I'm not satisfied. I'm not happy. And then sometimes they would have other problems. They would have, they'd be estranged from their families and things like that. They would have these crises, or they would have a major health crisis. And then they would realize that life is more important to them than some of their toys. And I always marveled at those conversations, and I tried to help them move in the direction of faith and so on. And only a very few, some were Catholic, and they realized that there was something missing in their lives. And fast forward to now, that's why we have at the Catholic CEO the St. Joseph Forums. We want to do this type of thing with people in an overtly Catholic atmosphere where we can talk about the faith and so on. So I'm just telling you that because it strikes me that you've done this. And so are your clients Catholic always, or are you one who serves all of your market, so to speak, using business terminology? Are you serving the whole market, or are you serving exclusively Catholics?
At this point, Henry, I'm serving Catholics.
Mm-hmm.
And what I say to people is, you don't have to be Catholic for me to coach you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to start our sessions in prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we invite the Holy Spirit in, we get a whole different experience. And I'm going to live out my Catholicism within the context of my coaching. The beautiful thing is that Don Clifton, who developed the positive lens of our talents, was a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And he collaborated with Christian people and a Catholic bishop to create a book called Living Your Strengths, which is the Catholic edition of Clifton's Strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Gallup bought it out after he passed away. Gallup purchased all the rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Don Clifton, when he began this, he used the word talents.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, don't go bury your talents, right? God intends for you to use them.
Yes, interesting.
How you choose to use them, they'll be 60 or 30, 60, 100-fold, right? If you invest them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're still calling them talents. And the irony is not lost on me.
Mm-hmm.
Gallup has now jumped into a far more secular realm of lots of equity, lots of diversity. I'm not going to make a comment about what that means, but they've taken a bit of a different direction. So what I've done is I've gone back to the beginning with Don Clifton's original application.
Mm-hmm.
And I've married that with metanoia Catholic anthropology and my own spin on some of the wording that Gallup uses. Name it, claim it, aim it. We're going to name the strengths that God gave us.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to claim our true baptismal identity through them. In other words, I always say that our assessment will show us our talents in a ranking of 34 themes. And that's a statistical reality. It's a mathematical formulation that shows us a spiritual reality, that we are uniquely and wonderfully made.
It's an impressive, I don't want to call it a philosophy exactly, but it's an impressive sort of rubric or regime of thought. Michelle, what happens? Let's talk about when a client comes to you, they sign up with you, they make an agreement with you, and you're going to work with them. What's a picture of what some of your clients come with, and then what happens to them after they go through your process? What's the result of all of this?
Well, usually what I hear, and I can tell you, I just met with someone this morning, and she said to me, I'm doing okay, but I've heard feedback from people all my life about who I am and how I exist in the world. And she said, I really just want to get clear on what my inner knowing of who I am is. She said, I don't want to, I don't need it to build a business or any such thing. She said, I want to, as St. Teresa of Avila would say, continue to know myself in humility.
Mm-hmm.
I really think the ultimate humility is understanding
Mm-hmm.
exactly how God made us and how he wants us to live out
Mm-hmm.
that uniqueness in the world. So people come to me to get sort of a neutral but unique definition of who I am and what am I to do?
Mm-hmm.
And are my desires good? Because each of the talents that we define has an intrinsic reward and desire. And God placed that desire in our hearts. So hopefully what you'll come away with as you apply these strengths in your daily life is more resilience.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
don't get your feelings hurt so much,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Interesting.
Because when we get stuck in that, and we would call it self-esteem for a while there, but
Mm-hmm.
when you get stuck in that, getting hurt maybe too easily or becoming overly sensitive to what other people might say or comments that other people might make, and you're devolving into that, oh, I'm so hurt place,
Mm-hmm.
or you're standing up and you're a little too loud in the space and you're overwhelming the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
Those are postures that you can take that are almost like a usurpation.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost usurping what's God's real purpose for you was. And you're saying, I'm not good enough. You're forgetting that God says, actually, you are.
Mm-hmm.
You're wonderfully made, perfectly made for what I intended you to be. And you're getting lost in this
Mm-hmm.
maybe secular definition of
Mm-hmm.
freedom, right? And so you'll come away with more freedom to be the good thing that God created you to be.
Are you helping people achieve the virtues in some ways? I mean, it seems to me you're bringing them skills, tools to live their daily life, whether at work or at home or in the wider community. But are you actually, I mean, come to mind fortitude. If someone is maybe a bit brittle and they're overly sensitive, maybe they're developing the virtue of courage or fortitude, or maybe prudence in the case of the other example that you mentioned. Is that where this is going?
Absolutely, because within the context of that Metanoia 7, a daily 7 model, you come to a place of repentance for your own participation in whatever the problem is that you're looking at. And we narrow it down to just one thing, at a time. Let's just focus in on this one thing, not get overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
So you come to a place of repentance and renouncing.
Mm-hmm.
You renounce the vice, truly,
Mm-hmm.
or the spirit of fear, the spirit of avarice, the spirit of, lack. A lot of us have this understanding of,
Yes.
view of ourselves of lack. And so then you can also announce those virtues and ask God to fortify those in you. And Metanoia Catholic gives you a whole list of very clearly defined vices and virtues. So it's not just fortitude, but it may be all of the understandings of courage underneath that. Something new I learned about the other day was acedia, and when we fall into acedia,
Yes.
and we get a little too comfortable,
Yeah.
I would say that in 2022, acedia is a big problem.
Yes. If I understand that concept, it's not, this is an inadequate word, but it's kind of like complacency or laziness.
Yes.
That's the word? Yeah.
You can call it sloth. That's a big
Sloth,
umbrella.
yeah.
But
The
under the
technical
umbrella
term.
of sloth, I think
Mhm.
acedia is just that desire for comfort that keeps us from wanting to do, honestly, what St. Teresa of Avila said, to
Mhm.
stretch and grow.
Mhm.
And in all humility, understand that God did give us gifts and talents to be used. And we do have something to do with
Mhm.
them.
Yes. I'm hearing you say that it's reminding me of a Lenten study I did a couple of years ago, reading a very profound 3-volume set, 3 ages of the interior life. And in that, when we seek virtue, the identity, let's say we're trying to fix ourselves. Let us say we're trying to be better Catholics. We're trying to be more spiritual, more holy. We have a lot of faults. I have a lot of faults, for example. But in this book, what I've learned is that we work on our primary fault. And so we pick the number one fault, let us say, or weakness. And then each day we resolve, as we get up and say our morning prayers, we resolve to work on that fault. And at noon, we'll examine our conscience on that fault and see how we progressed. And then at the end of the day, when we're doing our general examination of conscience before we go to sleep, we're talking about everything. So there's a little rubric there that I've become quite fascinated with, because great saints and great wise leaders of the church in the past have said that this works. Mm-hmm. So is there a parallel there? And I'm not trying to stretch it to create a parallel, but is there something in what you do that works on the primary situation, thing, not fault exactly, the primary thing that the person's worried about?
Absolutely. I think you could bring your examen into your daily 7 journaling even, because there's a goal setting piece. Exercise 3 is setting goals with God. And so what we understand is that God gives us desires and he wants us to purify them. And so sometimes the pursuit of that desire can also show us our primary fault. And so if you use the same goal to work on that primary fault every day for, let's say, 30 days, in Metanoia Catholic Academy, we do a 30 or 60-day challenge sometimes, where we support people take that one goal. And maybe it is a primary fault that you'd like to work on. Maybe you're working on pride or avarice, or, whatever it is that you want to put in there. And it's opposite virtue as well.
Yes.
And so you're bringing that into the journal process. And I go another level from there and I bring in your strengths. Look, this is how God made you. And yet there are times when you fall into these faults and you're overusing or underusing the gifts that God gave you. If you've been told that your empathy is too high and you're too sensitive and you're too emotional, you might stuff that down. And it might cause you to move into pride. This is something I have to hide. Well, when we hide, we're prideful.
Yeah, that's right. There's an excess. Virtue is always in the mean. And so when there's an excess, it generally tends towards pride, doesn't it? Which is the number one fault, I guess you could say, the number one sin, I suppose, in one way to put it. So Michelle, this is not, I'm going to bring up the word New Age. This is not New Age stuff.
No.
But it might, our audience might be interested to know why it isn't. And so could you talk about that for us? This is not New Age, but it sounds contemporary in some ways, but classical as well. You're going back to St. Teresa of Avila and you're linking it to the virtues. Why is it not New Agey to be doing these things that you do?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who express that concern. And so there's an understanding of the law of attraction right now that comes into a lot of life coaching. If you just put it out there to the universe, and some people confuse that with their prayer life. And there are Catholics who have been persuaded to bring that into what they believe. They believe it's part of their prayer life, that law of attraction. If I just ask God, often enough, I'm going to put it out there and he's going to answer my prayer. No, because through that process of the daily 7, we are repeatedly calling God into the space and asking him to refine our desires, to purify our hearts, to break our hearts of stone. And so the processing is incredibly different than anything you'll come across in New Age. We bring the Holy Spirit into every session that we do. We begin with prayer. We might pause in the middle. If somebody comes across something that is particularly weighty, or I'm not sure I'm equipped to deal with it in the moment, we'll just stop and pray.
Right. So you're sensitive to the moment.
Absolutely.
As we would say.
Yeah. And then too, I always have someone that I can refer them out to. So Matt and Aaron Ingold would say that they coaches to become Catholic. A lot of people come to them from a secular arena because they understand something is missing and they want to be Catholic coaches, marriage coaches, life coaches, parenting coaches, whatever you want to call it. And so they say, we want to form our formators with a Catholic anthropology. And that means that you're going to be repenting.
Yes.
That means that you're going to be inviting God in. And we do Lectio Divina. So I run a journal group every Wednesday. And at the end of every journal group, we pause and we do a little Lectio Divina, very short scripture usually, and then let everybody kind of reflect on that. I don't interpret anything. It's not, we're not going down that road.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, it's very theologically sound. Matt and Aaron have their own formators, their own spiritual directors that they work with. And many of the coaches have spiritual direction. And we're always getting our own coaching. Yeah.
This is something that it just struck me as you were speaking. Where do our parish priests come in to this? Now, you've mentioned that coaches get spiritual direction, and of course we all should get spiritual direction. It's a lost art. I mean, we don't request spiritual direction enough, in my opinion. But where does the formal, not the formal church, but where do the priests and the brothers and the sisters and the monks, where do they come into this process that you're working with?
Well, currently I'm prepping for a presentation to my own parish in a couple of weeks to bring all of this to our parish. And our pastor has approved it. He doesn't know much about it yet. There are some parishes who are strength-based parishes, not very many. It started, I've noticed in my research, I've noticed that when that Catholic version of Clifton Strengths came out, there were a lot of bishops and priests who were very, very interested in it. Only a few parishes have really stayed on track with it, trying to create a strengths-based parish, because they were even using it in confession, and that's an interesting prospect.
Yeah.
So I know that Matt and Aaron have their own priests, and I believe a bishop in particular. They follow Bishop Barron. They talk a lot about Father Ripperger and all of his basis in Aquinas. And other than that, though, as we get more and more coaches who are in formation, we're taking it out to our parishes. So we're introducing this to a lot of priests. I know there are other priests who are in our group right now, and I can't name them I could look them up, but I can't name them for the moment, who are getting more and more interested in the metanoia Catholic process. It's an exciting thing.
It's interesting because there are some, I'm thinking of some situations that I'm familiar with where people, it's difficult to get spiritual direction. I think I'll assert this. I think that there's not an unwillingness, but it's difficult if you belong to a parish that has 5,000 families or something like that, or 300 families. It's difficult to get airtime with anybody, particularly our priests. And so, what does it mean to be a strengths parish? I mean, when you're talking about, you're talking about training the priests and a group of people, leaders within the parish? Is that how it works?
Yeah, that was the ultimate goal when that book came out, Living Your Strengths, Catholic edition. That was the goal, was to create priests who understood strengths language, and then everyone, let's say in the youth ministry and within the parish office, and then bringing it out to the parish, which there's a challenge there because there's some cost that will be incurred. It's not free to take the test. So it's $50 to take the whole test. You can do a lesser version for $20, but there's a cost incurred. So, and then there's a willingness also to
Mhm.
take a really good look at oneself. But Henry, while you're talking, it reminds me that the journal, if you go to metanoiacatholic.com,
Mhm.
the journal itself, you can download a sample for free.
Mhm.
And then they'll send you daily for 7 days a
Mhm.
walkthrough of how to do this to begin to coach yourself. I will say that, you're going to run into yourself at some point and you might need
Mhm.
someone to help you, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So that's when you might hire a coach or enter the academy and get some additional help. But what I hear women say is, and I mostly coach women, but I do coach men. I
Mhm.
can coach men.
Mhm.
They take this journal
Yes.
with them to their confession,
Mhm.
and it helps them pinpoint, like, oh, yes, this
Mhm.
is it. I need to repent of this.
Yes. It's beyond the lists that we all
Yes.
prepared.
Yes.
It's more of an analysis of oneself. So there's probably a greater understanding. This
So
is
then
all
in
very.
confession, you can actually get a little bit of spiritual direction because you know what you're coming with. And your priest is hearing a very pointed, targeted confession with a range of virtues, not just, oh, Father, I gossiped. I've gone into that concept of gossip and torn it apart and figured out, what's my participation here? What's my weakness?
Yes.
What was my desire?
Yes. Yeah. What was my
Yeah.
motivation, I
Yeah.
suppose? Words like that. So this is, it strikes me again that, I know a range of parishes across North America, uh, very traditional parishes, somewhat, let's call them more liberal parishes for the want of a better word. Um, how do you introduce this idea when you have maybe in a conservative or traditional parish, you might have the Legion of Mary, you might have a men's group, you might have a Holy Name Society, you might have different ministries, you'll have a youth ministry. Is this an overarching thing, or is it something that is yet another offering, on the shelf of offerings in the parish store, to use
I
perhaps
think it's
crasser language, but
completely adaptable to whatever group you're using. Another group I'm going to present to this Saturday is one of my best friends. It's actually a beautiful story.
Mhm.
We got to be close friends about 15 years ago when we went into attachment theory,
Mhm.
because we started reading Divine Intimacy and we started
Yes.
reading
Yeah.
together daily. And we had this understanding of, God, we're being very punitive with our children, wanting them to understand God the Father in a way that maybe we could shift a little bit. God is a loving Father,
Mhm.
and our understanding of that started to change.
Mhm.
And as friends, we supported each other that way.
Mhm.
She comes from the Tridentine background,
Yes.
and so her oldest son and my second daughter met when they were
Mhm.
15.
Mhm.
And when they got married in the
Fast
Catholic
forward, they're
Church,
married.
fast forward, they got married.
Mhm.
Robin and I, she's just one of my dearest friends. We,
Mhm.
we held hands at the back of the church and we said, oh my goodness, our hearts are getting married today.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
she comes from the Tridentine background, very conservative Catholic background, and she's in a group of homeschooling people who've homeschooled their children all through,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, never wanting them to go to public school.
Yes.
And so I'm going to go teach her this model. I'm going to go teach a group. She has started a group called Total Woman, based on the teachings of Edith Stein.
Yes. Yes.
And so she's bringing in strengths and metanoia Catholic to her understanding of divine intimacy and our research over the years and application of attachment theory in a very Catholic way. And so we've got like all these different lenses that we can see this through. So the application is endless. Strengths can apply to absolutely anyone. And so can the Metanoia Catholic Daily 7. Even the more I don't know, Corsillo, I don't know some of the more
Yes.
what
Cursillo.
you might
Yes.
call Are they the more liberal end? I'm not sure.
They may, I'm not sure either, because I haven't studied them all recently, but I remember as a kid growing up hearing about those things. And so maybe one way to put that into context is that whether they're liberal or not, I may not know, but they are they're of an earlier era. They seem to have, I don't say they don't exist, but some of those ideas, I mean, there was a CFM movement when my parents belonged to it, Catholic Family Movement, which was a family-oriented movement, I would say in the 50s and the 60s, and sort of a post-war boom time thing that families belonged to, and it was a marriage enrichment. And then there were the Cana conferences, you might remember those, and things like that. So it's all, you know, it's all headed towards, if I understand what you've said to us today, this is all taking us to holiness. And I guess if maybe that's the test of it all. I don't want to imply that you need to have a test for this, but is that the ultimate goal, holiness? It's not, you know, so many of these groups that we find are aimed towards kind of what I call a prosperity gospel. Like, you know, Lord, make my business profitable.
Oh.
Lord, make me successful. No, that's not what Lord, give me the strength to responsibly run my business so that I can provide income and support for families, that sort of thing.
Right.
Is it all aimed towards holiness in the end?
Absolutely. It's aimed toward beatitude. I mean, the ultimate goal, and especially what I've been taught as a coach in Metanoia Catholic Academy, their coaching program is called the Purgative Way.
Yes.
If that tells you anything.
That's
so it's that purgation.
3 ages of the interior life. It's number one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That cultivation of interior life, that purgation that leads to divine intimacy and beatitude. And, you know, all with the eternal perspective of we are not made for this earth. We are made for God.
Yeah.
We are made in love to be loved, and God is love. And that is our final end.
This is, in many ways, it's actually a little bit of a guidepost for us to bring our little discussion today to conclusion, because that is our ultimate end. Well, the unitive, purgative, illuminative, unitive. And what I've learned is definitely, I'm one, and I know many, in fact, great Catholic teachers say that most people are in the purgative way, and we're at the very beginning of that. I always remember a famous priest said to us one time, in the purgative way, the first step is you stop sinning venially. Like, just think about that, Henry. The first step is to stop sinning venially. And so in the search for holiness, we work our way progressively through this, but all of the work that you do is destined, as you say, to end up in holiness and unitive aspect, closer to God in all aspects. Yes. And so maybe I'll ask you one last question before I ask you to tell us where we can reach you and how people can find all of your powerful tools that you have. But the last question would be, what what happens when someone, let's say, is exposed to all the things that you're doing, whether in a parish or just individually? What happens to them in the end? Are they, better business leaders? Are they better mothers? You work mainly with women. Are they better women in the wider context? Do they have more talents or skills that you've unleashed or unearthed? What actually happens in the end? And I'm trying to be a little bit precise here, and it may be a challenge to do that, but what happens at the end of all of this?
At the end of this, someone will come out with a clearer understanding of their specific and unique talent and the combination of those talents and what that looks like. And it really does open them up for more freedom to express themselves through those talents with confidence, because when this is how God made me, and this is the most true expression of it, it allows you to form more intimate and vulnerable relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say you can even become what they would call that transition person in your family,
Mm-hmm.
where you might begin to heal some generational wounds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I always say business is personal, because
Yes.
even if I'm working with a client who wants to grow her business and is stuck somewhere in defining
Mm-hmm.
who her client is, or I call it setting the pace for how she will run her business that will be sustainable for her. You know, that has something to do with all of her relationships. Guaranteed, if she's tripping up in her business, there's something that needs to be
Mm-hmm.
healed. Whether it's, and remembering that this is within the realm of coaching as well. So
Yes.
she may need to go and get some other kind of help. But I will tell you, lots of people who are in counseling say that coaching takes them much further than many years of counseling, only because it brings God into the picture
Yes.
so much more fully. And so we're looking for that ultimate freedom to do good, right? And
Yes.
that's what I want my clients to come away with, is that self-knowledge that brings humility into the picture, that says, ultimately, I am not in charge here.
Yeah.
This is how God made me. This is his purpose for me. And now I see it and I have the freedom to live it out.
Yeah. This is in the search for God's will for us. This is the ultimate end that we all need and want. Does the work you do, can it be applied to, let's say, the grandparent? You know, the grandparent still may be in search of all of these things we've been speaking about, or young people, teenagers. Is there an age bracket that this is more appropriate for, or do you work with young people, or I dare say children in families? Is that possible for this?
That's not my specialty. I certainly could. My focus is usually women with a little bit of life experience,
Yes.
who
Understood.
understand, because usually you don't see that you have some lack of virtue or something that needs to be healed. Because as we grow, we collect evidence for some of the lies that we heard when we were younger.
Yes. Yes.
Now, Gallup has an assessment for younger kids from the age of 11 to 14. They have a junior assessment. And as parents, you can strength spot with your kids. So what I would say is, I don't work with kids necessarily, but I work with parents to strength spot with their kids.
Yes.
To adapt their parenting to the needs of their children. Not to coddle them, not to make their life easier, but to see them for who they are. And maybe at least temper their comments to some degree. Sometimes we say things without realizing, wow, you're so loud. Where this child is highly competitive and communicative, and that can be channeled into something productive when you understand what you're looking at, and that this is a talent God's given you. You don't want to squash it, right? That hide it under a bushel thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So yes, I can work with a range of people. I prefer to work with women, and I prefer to work with women who have enough life experience to say, oh, I could do better.
Yeah. In the mentoring and coaching work that I do, mostly in a business context, I wouldn't consider myself a life coach. I would consider myself a business mentor with the Catholic perspective. That's what we do at the Catholic CEO. But I have discovered that men, well, I guess I've always known this, even in the secular work I did and still do to some extent. There's still clients that I have that are not at all connected to our work, but they are people who I guess it's lost on them. They don't have a faith connection. They don't have a spiritual direction, and there's an emptiness there. And on top of that all, they cannot show vulnerability. And so it's not just a man thing, as you know, but can you comment about that? Vulnerability. Men in particular, I noticed in business mentoring, it takes me sometimes a short period of time, sometimes a longer period of time, ultimately in the trust relationship that that grows from a mentoring relationship. People can become more vulnerable, but
Yeah.
this is a big challenge, it seems to me. What do you think about that?
So without getting too weighty, we all have that deep desire to be known,
Mm-hmm.
to be delighted in.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And when I say that to men, especially, you are God's delight. He wants to delight in you.
Mm-hmm.
It has a tendency to hit him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in the coaching relationship, vulnerability is easy to come to when you've created some trust. So a leader should be able to create trust, compassion, hope, and stability.
Yes. Yes.
So when you do that in a coaching relationship and you show a man his strengths, the beauty of the good that he is, and you can also show him his weaknesses through those strengths, his overuse patterns, his underuse patterns, where he's hiding his heart.
Mm-hmm.
You can very quickly bring a man to a place of humility where he can see his true self and the impact that he's having, or the impact that he's holding himself back from having, from fear. And so without going too deeply into those things, into counseling, strengths language combined with some of this metanoia, reflection and renewing of the mind, can very, very quickly bring anyone, but especially men, to a place of vulnerability that doesn't feel so scary. It doesn't feel so exposing. But that understanding of, strengths makes you feel seen.
Interesting. I guess there's so many more things we could go into, and we'll need to do this again. I think we'll have to continue this conversation at a later point. Where's the dividing line between everything that you've said today and then formal counseling with a specialist, let's call it? Is there a point when you say to somebody, actually you need something that anything that we're talking about today cannot give you? How carefully do you tread in that area?
I start off with that. So the first thing I do in a discovery call, I find out what are your other supports? What other support are you getting currently? How much do you want to share with me? And so that's really important to begin.
Yes.
And so that'll begin in a discovery call before we ever get started. I kind of get an understanding of what are your needs? What are you working on? And is this a good fit right now? Do I have the scope of skills that you need? That's incredibly important to me. I don't ever want to step outside of my capabilities. But I have to add that this kind of coaching is so powerful that it can certainly coincide with any kind of therapy or coaching or counseling that you might be involved in. And there is a moment sometimes in coaching where trauma is revealed.
Yes.
And at that point, I can say, this is what I'm seeing. And maybe I can refer you to, number one, spiritual direction, because forgiveness is so key. And again, we could talk, you're right. We could do another whole podcast on that. Or, maybe it's time to bring in an additional Catholic, I would say, Catholic counselor.
Yes, of course.
And there are plenty of them out there.
Yeah.
I am coming out as a Catholic coach right now, and I'm seeing a wave of that in the coaching arena. I'm seeing a wave of business coaching coming out as Catholic, like yourself.
Yes.
And we're getting bolder.
Yes, we are.
There's a need.
Yeah. The culture is pressing us from all sides, particularly if you're running a business or if you're working in a downtown kind of corporate job. And we know this. And so we're going to have to band together. We're going to have to create the Catholic economy. And these manifestations that you're talking about are all the same. I also, last thought for me, I think on this is that the church in her wisdom Father Ripperger is a great example of this. We both know what he says. The church looks at the topics that Father Ripperger works on first from the point of view, do you need the outside intervention, the professional, the medical or the psychiatric or the psychological intervention? Then, having established whether that's the case or not, then the church looks at the more, shall we call it, diabolical influences on people. So there's a certain wisdom in that, and I can see that you're applying the same thing, especially at the very beginning when you start with somebody. So
Yes.
Very interesting. Well, I think there's so much more we could talk about, and I'd like to do this again sometime, because there's a whole range of subjects that have come up. So it's been a great pleasure to have you with us today. Maybe could you close with telling us what's coming up for you? Do you have any workshops or sessions going on? Where do we find you? Where do we get all your tools and resources? Give us a summary of all of that, please, Michelle.
Currently, I'm doing workshops locally and in person. I'm just thirsting for that contact right now. And I think we all are, as we open up here in the United States, in some states. So I'm doing those in person right now. And this is tough, because right now I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And a lot of my Catholic clients are not necessarily there. So I am working on a website so that that'll be accessible to everyone. But currently the best place to go is Instagram. It's Michelle Dunne _timely strengths at Instagram. And I have a link tree there. Other than that, I think email is probably the best way to get in touch with me. And that would be michelledunne.coaching@gmail.com. I love to talk to people, face to face or voice to voice. I have a Visita scheduling website where we can have like a coffee chat, and we can schedule that, or a discovery call, because I really do like to get to know people personally.
This is such valuable information. So thanks again, Michelle, for being with us. I like what you said about getting to know people personally, because that's the essence of, that's how we evangelize. That's how we spread the faith. That's how we deal and really help someone achieve in this journey to holiness. We help them by getting to know them, and it can't be surface. It can't be peripheral. It has to be direct and closely tied to the individual. So I can really respect what you've said there. So thanks again for being with us. Michelle Dunne is quite an accomplished individual, as you can see, everyone. And make sure you check out all of her information, and I hope that we will have you back at some point. Thanks again, Michelle, for being here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's Henry Katarna, the Catholic CEO. Thanks for joining us in this Exemplary Catholic Leaders series, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you very much.